Welcome back. Well, CNN hosted a town hall style interview with President Joe Biden. I thought it was odd that the room was half empty. I don't know, maybe they didn't try to fill it. You would think that a convention style, town hall style meeting with the president would be full. It wasn't. It was, I don't know, modestly interesting, but I thought what was much more interesting than the content of what Joe Biden said was how he said it, or more precisely, how he didn't say it, how he forgot what he was trying to say, how he lost track of where he was going. The Republican National Committee War Room put together what they call a 49-second compendium of the worst of, and yes, they were cherry picking it out of a longer event. But I ask you, if this had been Donald Trump, if this had been a conservative of, getting on in age, in his upper 70s, would he have been given a pass? I have to tell you, watching this compilation, this short summary of last night, I can't imagine how the top story emerging from the evening isn't Biden's mental health. Take a look.
I mean, everybody thought I was a little nuts. Is in fact, it's going to be. What can a kid say? You got the vaccination, or whether those aliens are here or not. We know that this virus is, in fact, it's going to be, what could they do? Portman is a congressman from this area. Xi Jinping in China. He's a bright and really tough guy. Over 600,000 people out there signing, 6 million people. Whether or not there's a man on the moon or whatever, something. 4 years old, when you see a red light cross the street, whoa, boy, you why can't the
That was edited for humorous effect. I watched actually longer excerpts directly, and actually the unedited version was more worrisome to me. Listen, we're having a little bit of fun, but it's actually a deadly serious point. Ronald Reagan was savaged for his later years when he had onset of Alzheimer's. No such discussion seems to be permitted in the mainstream meeting about Joe Biden. Well, let's move away from his style and talk about his substance. And to do that, let's bring in our friend Joel Pollock, senior editor-at-large at Breitbart.com. Joel, great to see you. Maybe that exaggerates his cognitive decline, but I actually think it happens more often than it doesn't happen. And you have strange things like either the shouting outbursts or the whispering. I think it's troublesome, and I'm having a little bit of fun at his expense, but I actually think there's a real issue there. Do you think so?
There is a real issue, although if you read the transcript of the whole town hall, he does seem to be able to string concepts together. He's out of touch in general, like much of his party is out of touch. I mean, when you look at the substance of his answers, they're not more out of touch than the Democrats' policies on a number of other things. You can get more articulate Democrats, but basically the policies are just as out of whack. I will say that you don't have to go back to Ronald Reagan to find a press corps that was very concerned about the president's mental state. They were constantly questioning Trump's mental ability, and they insisted on cognitive tests. Remember, he had to roll out the White House physician, who's now a member of Congress, by the way, but they had to roll out the White House physician to talk about how Trump had scored on a cognitive test, and people made fun of Trump for giving people the details of the cognitive test. It was something like woman, man, camera, whatever it was, I can't remember. But that became a punchline among Democrats who took it for granted that Trump was crazy. And yet we're not allowed to talk about Biden's possible cognitive decline. It's not even something people make fun of on Saturday Night Live. They have been very hands-off with the new president. And he doesn't come across very well. In some of those sequences, for example, the joke about the 4-year-old boy crossing at a red light, Biden was talking about how absurd it was to have someone cross on a red light. So he was saying that's something you shouldn't do. And of course, the little highlight reel presented it as if it was something he said you should do. It was a little weird, though. And he does come up with these strange examples from the recesses of his memory. He calls children, little Johnny and that sort of thing. I mean, it's just weird. So he does seem to be losing his grip a little bit, although I think in terms of his relation to his party's policy, he's still very much aware of what the policy is. It's just that the policy is so bizarre. Take, for example, his response to a restaurant owner who said, what about the labor shortage? And Joe Biden said, well, maybe people have just left your industry for more lucrative industries. And that's basically the Democratic position. I mean, they don't really care about small business. They want this $15 an hour minimum wage, and they're not so concerned about the restaurant industry or other industries that might have tight margins. So Biden sort of says the quiet part out loud. I mean, he says that, well, we don't really care about your industry. And that was very dissatisfying, not just to the restaurant owner, but to some of the journalists who brought it up again at the White House press briefing and said, look, this wasn't a good answer. Yeah. But that's the answer his party is giving. They're just not concerned about people who invest in businesses, grow businesses, create jobs for other people. They think jobs come from the moon, to use another Biden reference, the man on the moon, and they can just set wages wherever they want to. And, it's going to be fine. And so Biden is a little odd when he tries to explain these policies, but that's partly because the policies are so crazy.
If my math is right, we're 6 months in to Biden's presidency, the inauguration, of course, being in mid-January. So 6 months, it's time to fill most of the appointments, set his high priorities, start a few, make a name for himself. He's no longer in a, quote, honeymoon, although in my view, the media honeymoon for Democrats is perpetual. Is it too early, and maybe it's not, is it too early to get a sense of how the midterm elections in 2022 might go? That they might be a reaction to Biden, a pulling back, or an endorsement, an enthusiastic endorsement of them. I'm watching from a foreign country and through the filter of the media. I'm not on the ground there. How do you think the midterms are shaping up? I know it's still 18 months away for that, but what would you think?
The conventional wisdom right now is that Republicans will win the House back and fall short of winning the Senate back. It might be very much like the first midterms of the Trump administration, where there's so much dissatisfaction within the country with the direction of how Nancy Pelosi is leading. It was a different problem under Trump. You had Paul Ryan not exactly leading the Republican-led House anywhere in particular. He got the tax cuts done, but very little else. With Pelosi, she's leading the country into a dangerously radical path, and people are reacting against it. But there are also some technical reasons she's going to lose seats. Republicans control the redistricting process in many states, for example. Democrats did not do well in the 2020 elections at the legislative level, at the state level. So they are going to lose control of the map. You could even just redraw the district lines and cost the Democrats control of the House without even having an election, or before having an election. And then you have the election, and Democrats are really not doing very well. The Senate's a little tougher map for Republicans this year, so I think the Senate's conventional wisdom anyways, that the Senate will remain in Democratic hands, although barely. Look, I think the Biden administration is running out of steam. The big picture is they don't have much left in the tank. You talk about a honeymoon period. Donald Trump had no honeymoon, and he filled several key appointments a lot more quickly than Biden is doing. And Biden has everybody on board to pass pretty much anybody he wants. Right now, there's an eco-terrorist, I'm not kidding, a former eco-terrorist, someone who was a sort of unindicted witness, but who was participating in some of this eco-terrorism in the 1990s. She's a nominee, a legitimate nominee, for the Bureau of Land Management, which is one of the largest land management agencies in the world. It manages enormous tracts of land in the American West. And she hasn't been withdrawn. She's in front of a Senate committee right now, and there are Democrats who say they're going to support her. And that's the kind of friendly audience they have in Congress, where even an eco-terrorist is a possible nominee. I mean, it's awful, but they have so much support in Congress they can do whatever they want, and yet he's slow filling these posts. We heard yesterday that reassuring news that the Biden administration is going to fill the post of a monitor of anti-Semitism. So they're going to have an anti-Semitism monitor, don't worry, in just a few weeks. Not like the problem is urgent or anything. I mean, we've only been seeing anti-Semitic attacks on the streets of the country for the last several weeks. Take your time, guys, no big rush. So they're just taking an awfully long time to fill a lot of important positions. They were caught flat-footed in the war between Israel and Hamas. They didn't have an Israeli ambassador in May. Trump had one in March, and that was despite congressional opposition. For all the opposition Trump had and all the nominees that Chuck Schumer held up and refused to allow to go through, Trump was quicker, actually, in filling some of these positions than Biden is. And it's striking because Trump got negative press all the time for how long he was supposedly taking on filling all these roles. What you're seeing is Biden's agenda grinding to a halt. There's not a lot of enthusiasm. He may get this infrastructure deal done, but it failed a key vote this week. They're going to have another chance at it, but there isn't much left that this administration can do. They've lost that honeymoon edge, and I think they've lost it permanently. They may get an infrastructure deal done, but it's going to be with a lot of hair pulling and arm twisting and so forth. And he's not really leading the country anywhere the country wants to go. So I think the midterm is looking pretty bad for Democrats, although, again, I think the Republicans, at least according to the conventional wisdom, are going to fall short in the Senate.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.